Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about the effects of the French Revolution on Europe. Here are your goals. So the French Revolution was basically a disaster for Europe, at least in the short term. From 1789, when the revolution broke out, to 1815, there were about 20 years of war during this 26-year period. And during these wars, basically all of the different European powers were sucked into the conflict, and over 1 million people total died. On top of this, the wars were incredibly expensive, and this forced citizens to pay higher taxes. It left all of the combatant nations heavily in debt, and it also, some historians argue, slowed down the economic development of Europe during this time period. And the big question everybody is asking after this period of warfare is, how do we prevent this from happening again? And Europe tries to answer this question at the Congress of Vienna. So the Congress of Vienna was a meeting of Europe's 5 great powers: Britain, Russia, France, Prussia, and Austria. And yes, you'll notice that even though France was on the losing side of this war, they were allowed to come. Also, smaller nations were allowed to attend, but it was the big 5 powers that really called the shots here. And this happened right after Napoleon was defeated, and then defeated again in 1814 and 1815. And the purpose of the Congress of Vienna was to reorganize Europe in order to prevent another general war between the great powers of Europe, and also to preserve the existing social order. So basically to prevent anything crazy like the French Revolution from happening again. They wanted to stabilize the existing society and to make it so that another huge war would not happen. And they decided that the best way to do this was to create a balance of power between the strong states of Europe. And basically the idea of the balance of power was that there would be enough powerful states in Europe that if any one European state tried to do what France did again and take over all of Europe, the other countries would be able to team up to defeat it pretty easily. So if one state tried to expand, everybody else could team up and crush it, and there would not be this huge, drawn-out period of war like there just was. One of the main questions of the Congress of Vienna is, what do we do with France? How does France fit into this new system of balance of powers that we're trying to set up? And basically, whenever you beat a country in a war, you have 2 options. You can either punish them severely, like basically take away their territory and make them pay for the war and other stuff like that, or you can be lenient and basically forgive them for the war. And this might not seem like it makes a lot of sense, but it prevents the country from being angry at you and possibly prevents future wars. And so in the Congress of Vienna, the great powers decide to treat France lightly. And France is allowed to keep some of the land that it captured during the revolution. It's forced to pay only a small indemnity. An indemnity is like a penalty that the losing side of a war has to pay in order to pay the winning side. So if you lose a war, you also have to pay for the damages that you inflicted on the side that beat you. And finally, France becomes a constitutional monarchy under Louis XVIII. I'm not sure exactly how he's related to Louis XVI, but this is a return of the old family of France. And so France keeps some of the stuff that it gained during the revolution, like the Constitution, but it also goes back to the old ruling family of France. But so why were they so lenient on France? There were 2 main reasons. One is they needed France to participate in the new balance of powers. Basically, they needed France to remain sort of strong. That way it could help in case one of the other countries in Europe tried to do something crazy. And 2, they didn't want to treat France too harshly because they were afraid that it would trigger another French Revolution, which is the last thing they wanted. So they kept France pretty strong and didn't take too much away from it. That way the citizens of France wouldn't be too angry. After France, the Congress of Vienna also has to decide what's going to happen in the rest of Europe, because Napoleon basically captured, or redrew the whole map of Europe however he wanted, And the Congress of Vienna now has to decide how to redraw the map now that Napoleon's been defeated. And basically, they redistribute territory in order to strengthen the great powers and to set up a balance of power that will be able to prevent France from ever breaking out and conquering Europe again. And so Russia gains a bunch of territory in Poland. Prussia gains some territory in Poland and also some smaller German states. Austria gains control of northern Italy. The Netherlands gains some French-speaking lands to the south. These different territorial changes strengthen all of these states at the expense of France. So France is weakened, but not too much. Russia, Prussia, and Austria, the other three main powers on the European continent, are strengthened. Britain doesn't take any land on the continent. It basically doesn't want to get caught up in this the potential wars on the continent. But Britain is made stronger because it no longer has to compete with France for control of the rest of the world. So Britain is free to expand its global empire. And as a result of all of this, Europe gets to enjoy basically 100 years without any major European wars. There are some smaller wars, but nothing on the scale of the Napoleonic Wars until the outbreak of World War I in 1914. So the whole idea of the balance of powers that's set up in the Congress of Vienna actually works, at least to the extent that it prevents another major war for the next 100 years. But on the downside, the Congress of Vienna does help to plant the seeds of future revolutions. And one reason for this is that the territory that is redistributed is given out without any concern for the wishes of the people who live there, which helps the people in those areas to sort of develop a new national identity. So, for example, the people of Congress in Vienna basically give parts of Italy and give Poland away to other countries. And the Italians and the Poles aren't really happy about this, and they start to think of themselves as a nation and to dream of Polish or Italian independence. And this lays the groundwork for later revolutions that we're going to talk about. In 1815. And so you can see the great powers. Britain stays the same. France becomes smaller, but is still a very sizable state. Russia is enormous, and it gains a chunk of Central Europe by annexing the Kingdom of Poland. Prussia, which is the dark green, gains a bunch of land in the west on the border of France. Part of the reason for that is that Prussia is supposed to be able to prevent France from taking any of that territory again. Austria gets a big chunk of northern Italy and also this coast of the Dalmatian coast down there on the south. And so these five powers are all really strong states, and they are supposed to be all roughly equal. That way they can fight against each other in the event that one of them attempts to break out and conquer Europe. However, they're not all totally equal. If you wanted to rank them in terms of total strength, you would probably say Great Britain, then Russia, then France, then Prussia, and then Austria in that order. But of course, historians could argue about this, and I'm sure they have spent way too long arguing about relative ranking. But the fact is they're all super strong states, and they can all check each other in case any of them wants to do anything crazy and pull another France. But there are also some smaller buffer states. Basically, they're territory that they gave away to smaller states that they didn't want any of the great powers to control. So, for example, the Netherlands is given a bunch of French land in the south. Piedmont and Sardinia is given land that was taken from France, and basically they're just allowed to have this little kingdom as long as they don't, make any of the great powers angry, and so on. And so this system that is set up turns out to actually be pretty stable, and there is no further general war until the outbreak of World War I in 1914. new system set up by the Congress of Vienna, we also see the emergence of something known as the Holy Alliance, which is basically like a super conservative reaction to the ideas of the French Revolution. And it's undertaken by the three most conservative great powers, Prussia, Austria, and Russia. So Britain and France are actually okay with a lot of the ideas of the French Revolution. The idea of representative government has been around in England since 1688 with the Glorious Revolution, constitutional monarchy the same way, and the idea that society is going to gradually change as time goes on. So France and Britain are cool with this, and they're not really too upset about the idea of things changing over time. But Austria, Prussia, and Russia are definitely upset about this. They are not okay with any of the stuff that happened during the French Revolution. They basically hold to the old-fashioned 17th century idea of absolutism, and these rulers claim divine right. They don't claim to rule in the service of the people, but instead claim that they are the representatives of God on earth. And so in these areas, all revolutionary ideas are staunchly opposed. Basically, if you start saying, hey, maybe we should have a representative government, you go to jail, or worse. And so since these three guys all have the same very old school idea of how Europe should be, they form an alliance known as the Holy Alliance. And so Austria, Prussia, and Russia promise to work together in the future, one, in order to support their old school absolutist regimes, and two, to repress any revolutionary activity. So basically, let's say if in Austria there was an Austrian Revolution where a bunch of revolutionary people took over the government and declared a representative state, Prussia and Russia would promise to send in troops to crush the rebellion and to restore the Austrian monarchy, and likewise the other way. So these guys are totally closed off to the idea of change, and they don't want things to get any different than they were back before the French Revolution. Quick summary. As a result of the French Revolution, we see both a conservative backlash, but also a revolutionary awakening. So the conservative backlash happens both because of the Congress of Vienna, which is really pretty conservative. They want to strengthen the existing regimes of Europe and to prevent future wars and future revolutions. And the Holy Alliance goes a step further and rejects all the ideas of the French Revolution. But at the same time, we see a revolutionary awakening. First of all, the ideals of the French Revolution are actually really popular among a lot of people in Europe, and they inspire revolutionaries across Europe and across the rest of the world. And as we learned during the wars of religion, it's really hard to use governmental power and military strength to force people to change their ideas. And this happens after the French Revolution as well. The ideas of liberty, equality, and brotherhood preached by the Revolution remain popular and are going to pop up again and again, much to the concern of the conservative powers, especially in Eastern Europe. But also, new ideas of national identity are going to begin to disrupt the European state system that were set up during the Congress of Vienna. So, for example, a lot of Italian territory was given to Austria, but the people that live in Italy don't really like this. And so they start to say, hey, I'm not Austrian, I'm Italian. Why don't we have an Italian state that's similar to the Austrian state? So you start to see a kind of a breakdown of this old system where basically you can wheel and deal territories as the people that live in these territories start to identify as particular nationalities. And this is going to cause a whole lot of trouble in the 1800s and 1900s. And we're going to look at this a little bit later. Here are your goals.